The strangest thing about betrayal isn't the moment it happens. It's how many people are smiling when it does. My name is Nathan Walker. I'm 43 years old, born and raised in Oklahoma. And until 2 Christmases ago, I thought I understood exactly who the people around me were. I thought I knew my wife. I thought I knew her family. I thought 20 years of marriage meant something permanent. Looking back now, I realize Christmas Day wasn't the day my marriage ended. It was simply the day everyone finally stopped pretending. Snow drifted lazily outside the Bennett family home that afternoon, settling on the hedges and covering the driveway in a blanket of white. Inside, the house glowed with warm yellow lights. Christmas music floated softly through hidden speakers. The scent of cinnamon, roasted ham, and fresh cookies filled every room. It looked like something straight out of a holiday movie. Perfect. Safe. Familiar. That's probably why what happened next felt so unreal. Olivia stood beside the Christmas tree wearing a dark green sweater that matched her eyes. Her parents sat near the fireplace. Her younger brother Kyle lounged in an armchair, scrolling through his phone. Several cousins filled the room, sipping wine and laughing at private jokes. Everyone seemed unusually cheerful. At the time, I thought they were simply enjoying the holiday. Now I know better. They already knew what was coming. I was the only one walking into that room blind. The strange feeling started when Olivia asked me to sit down. Her voice sounded calm. Too calm. I remember setting my coffee mug on the side table and lowering myself onto the couch. The room gradually grew quieter. Conversations faded. Smiles lingered. Eyes shifted toward me. A few people exchanged glances. It felt rehearsed somehow, though I couldn't explain why. Then Olivia reached into a leather folder resting beside her chair. My stomach tightened immediately. There are moments in life when your instincts recognize danger before your mind catches up. This was one of them. She pulled out several sheets of paper and placed them carefully on the coffee table between us. Divorce papers. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. I simply stared at the documents. 20 years. Holidays. Anniversaries. Late-night conversations. Road trips. Mortgage payments. Shared dreams. Somehow all of it had been reduced to a stack of paper sitting 6 feet away from a Christmas tree. Nathan, Olivia said softly, I think this is best for both of us. The words landed with surprising gentleness. Almost professionally. Like she had practiced them. Like she'd already said them 100 times in front of a mirror. I looked up at her. Her expression didn't contain anger. It didn't contain sadness either. That was what hurt the most. There was nothing there. No grief. No hesitation. Just certainty. Then something happened that I will never forget. Richard Bennett, my father-in-law, lifted his champagne glass. About time, he said. A few people laughed. Then Susan Bennett smiled. Kyle smirked. Someone actually clapped. Another cousin joined in. Within seconds, several members of the family were applauding as though they had just witnessed the conclusion of a successful business deal. The sound echoed through the room. Sharp. Bright. Wrong. I sat perfectly still. Across the room, Christmas lights reflected in the ornaments hanging from the tree. Red, gold, silver. Beautiful little reflections dancing above a scene that suddenly felt unrecognizable. I remember thinking how strange it was that the room still smelled like cinnamon. How the fire continued crackling in the fireplace. How Bing Crosby kept singing through the speakers as if nothing had happened. The world has a funny way of continuing even when yours stops. Don't make this difficult, Richard added. Everyone knows this is overdue. More laughter followed. Not cruel laughter exactly. Worse, comfortable laughter. The kind people share when they think the outcome is already decided. I looked around the room slowly. Face after face. People I had bought Christmas gifts for. People whose weddings I had attended. People I had loaned money to without expecting repayment. People who apparently believed this was a celebration. And that's when something unexpected happened. I didn't get angry. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. The kind of calm that arrives when a question you've been asking yourself for years finally receives an answer. Olivia slid a pen toward me. Just sign, Nathan. The room grew silent again. Everyone watched. Waiting. Expecting resistance. Expecting pleading. Expecting some dramatic scene they could talk about afterward over dessert. Instead, I picked up the pen. My signature moved smoothly across the paper. One page, then another, then the last. When I finished, I placed the pen back on the table. Several people looked almost disappointed. Their celebration had been too easy. Olivia blinked. Richard frowned slightly. I stood up and adjusted my jacket. Then I looked directly at every person in that room and smiled. Not a forced smile. Not an angry one. A genuine smile. You should all enjoy tonight, I said calmly. Seriously, make the most of it. Confusion spread across several faces. Olivia narrowed her eyes. What does that mean? She asked. I picked up my car keys from the table and glanced once more at the glowing Christmas tree. Nothing, I said. Just enjoy the evening. Then I walked toward the front door. Behind me, nobody spoke. And for the first time all afternoon, the room felt completely silent. The cold air hit my face the second I stepped outside, and for the first time that day, I could breathe. Snow crunched beneath my boots as I crossed the driveway toward my truck. Behind me, the Bennett house glowed with warmth and laughter, but it no longer felt like a place I belonged. I sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. The windshield reflected strings of Christmas lights hanging from nearby houses. Families were opening presents. Children were drinking hot chocolate. Somewhere, people were making memories they would cherish for years. Meanwhile, I was sitting alone with a signed divorce agreement resting on the passenger seat. Strangely, I did not feel devastated. Not yet. What I felt was clarity. Looking back, maybe that was because the marriage had been dying for much longer than I wanted to admit. The paperwork was simply the official announcement. I rested my hands on the steering wheel and found myself thinking about a tiny apartment 20 years earlier. Olivia and I had been newly married back then. We were both broke. The apartment sat above an old hardware store in Tulsa. The pipes rattled every winter, and the carpet looked older than both of us combined. We owned exactly one couch, a folding kitchen table, and a mattress on the floor. Yet I remember those years as some of the happiest of my life. We used to sit on the roof and talk about the future. We dreamed about a house with a big front porch. We dreamed about financial security. We dreamed about building something meaningful together. Back then, we were a team. At least I thought we were. I worked every opportunity one could find. During the day, I managed construction projects. At night, I studied contracts, permits, and business plans. Weekends disappeared into side jobs and client meetings. Success did not arrive all at once. It arrived one exhausting day at a time. One contract, one customer, one risk, one sacrifice. The first year I started my company, I slept less than 5 hours most nights. There were months when I was not sure payroll would clear. There were mornings when I sat alone in my office staring at spreadsheets while drinking coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. But every time I questioned whether it was worth it, I pictured the future Olivia and I had planned together. That vision kept me moving forward. The funny thing about building a life is that people usually notice the results, but never the cost. They see the house. They see the vacations. They see the comfortable lifestyle. They do not see the years spent carrying the weight. They do not see the opportunities declined. They do not see the pressure. Olivia's family certainly never did. Richard liked to talk as though success simply appeared. He loved telling people that Olivia had always been destined for a better life. What he never mentioned was the period when his own business nearly collapsed. I remembered writing a check that helped keep his doors open. I remembered helping Kyle find work when nobody else would hire him. I remembered covering unexpected medical expenses when Susan needed treatment years ago. I never viewed those things as favors. They were family. That is what family does. Or at least that is what I believed. The road ahead disappeared into falling snow as I sat there remembering all of it. Every holiday, every milestone, every compromise. Somewhere along the way, the story had changed. What began as gratitude slowly became expectation. What began as partnership slowly became entitlement. I did not recognize it happening at first because change rarely arrives all at once. It arrives in small moments. A dismissive comment. A forgotten thank you. A joke that is not really a joke. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. I simply chose not to see them. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. A text message appeared on the screen. It was from an old friend named Michael Carter. We had known each other for nearly 15 years. The message was short, simple, almost ordinary. Yet the moment I read it, a faint smile crossed my face. Because while the Bennett family believed the story had just ended, Michael's message reminded me of something very important. The most important chapters had not even started yet. I did not reply to Michael's message right away. Instead, I started the truck and pulled onto the road. Snow drifted across the pavement in thin white ribbons illuminated by the headlights. The Bennett house disappeared in my rearview mirror, growing smaller with every mile. Most people think marriages fall apart because of one dramatic event. A single betrayal, a single argument, a single mistake. The truth is usually less obvious. Foundations crack long before buildings collapse. You just do not notice until the walls start leaning. As I drove through the quiet streets, I found myself replaying moments I had ignored for years. Small moments, harmless moments. At least that is what I told myself at the time. About 3 years earlier, Olivia had started changing. Not overnight. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But I noticed. She became less interested in conversations about our future and more interested in conversations about status. She began comparing our lives to other people's lives. At dinner parties, she talked about luxury neighborhoods, expensive vacations, and executive lifestyles. Sometimes she would casually mention what someone else's husband earned. Other times, she would point out a friend's new home or new car. None of it sounded especially alarming. People compare themselves to others all the time. But over time, the pattern became impossible to ignore. What concerned me was not what she said. It was what she stopped saying. She stopped asking how my projects were going. She stopped asking whether I was sleeping enough. She stopped asking how I felt about anything at all. Conversations became transactions. Practical, efficient, empty. Looking back, I think that was when the distance truly began. Her family changed too. Richard became increasingly dismissive whenever my name came up. Kyle developed a habit of making jokes at my expense during family gatherings. Even Susan, who had once treated me like a son, started viewing me differently. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I was working too much. Maybe I was distracted. Maybe I was imagining things. That is the dangerous thing about slow change. It gives you endless opportunities to explain it away. One summer evening stands out in my memory more than any other. We were attending a charity fundraiser at a country club outside Tulsa. The ballroom overlooked a golf course stretching for hundreds of acres beneath a golden sunset. Olivia spent most of the evening speaking with a group of executives and investors. Every time I approached, the conversation seemed to pause. Not dramatically, just enough to make me feel like an interruption. At one point, I watched her laugh at something a man named Derek Langford said. Derek was successful, polished, and well-connected. The kind of person who always seemed perfectly comfortable in expensive rooms. Nothing inappropriate happened. Nothing that would justify suspicion. Yet something about the interaction stayed with me. Not because of Derek. Because of Olivia. The look on her face reminded me of someone chasing a future she believed she deserved. A future that no longer included me. Months later, another moment caught my attention. I came home early from a business trip and found Olivia and Susan sitting at the kitchen table reviewing financial articles on a laptop. They quickly changed the subject when I walked in. Again, nothing alarming. Nothing concrete. Yet the feeling lingered. The same feeling I had experienced on Christmas Day before the papers appeared. Instinct. Quiet. Persistent instinct. The more I thought about those memories, the more pieces started fitting together. The jokes. The comparisons. The growing entitlement. The private conversations that always seemed to stop when I entered the room. None of it proved anything by itself. But together, they painted a picture I could no longer ignore. By the time I pulled into my driveway that night, the snow had nearly stopped. The house sat silent beneath a blanket of white. I remained in the truck for a moment staring at the dark windows. Then my phone buzzed again. Another message from Michael Carter. This time it contained only 7 words. We need to talk tomorrow. It is time. I read the message twice. Then I smiled. Because for the first time in years, I realized something important. The Bennett family believed they had spent years studying me. The truth was far more interesting. They had spent years studying the version of me I wanted them to see. The next morning arrived gray and cold. A layer of fresh snow covered the neighborhood, turning every rooftop and mailbox into a clean white outline against the winter sky. I woke before sunrise, not because I had slept well, but because my mind refused to stay quiet. The house felt different now, larger somehow, emptier. The silence carried a weight that had not been there before. I poured a cup of coffee and stood by the kitchen window watching the first hints of daylight spread across the street. 20 years earlier, I would have called Olivia from the bedroom and asked if she wanted breakfast. That thought came automatically, like reaching for a light switch in a room that no longer exists. Old habits survive long after relationships die. At exactly 8 o'clock, my phone rang. Michael Carter. I answered immediately. "Meet me at my office," he said. 9:30. "Bring nothing. Just yourself." His tone was calm, but there was something beneath it. Not urgency. Certainty. 45 minutes later, I pulled into downtown Tulsa. Michael's office occupied the top floor of a brick building overlooking the Arkansas River. We had known each other for years. He was one of the few people who understood both business and human nature equally well. More importantly, he was one of the few people who never confused appearance with reality. When I entered his office, he was already seated behind a conference table. A thick folder rested in front of him. Sunlight filtered through the windows, reflecting off the polished wood surface. Michael gestured toward the chair across from him. "How are you holding up?" he asked. I considered the question carefully. "Better than I expected." He nodded. "Good. Because what happens next requires a clear head." He slid the folder across the table. I recognized it immediately. The sight of it pulled me backward 7 years. Back to a different office. A different season. A different version of myself. 7 years earlier, one of my largest clients had gone through a brutal divorce. I watched millions of dollars disappear into legal battles that lasted years. Businesses suffered. Employees suffered. Entire families suffered. The experience taught me something important. Success without protection is simply future risk waiting for a trigger. Around that time, Michael and I spent months reviewing every aspect of my financial structure. Not because I expected problems, because responsible people prepare before problems arrive. We reorganized ownership structures. We established trusts. We separated operating entities from long-term holdings. We created layers designed to protect employees, assets, investments, and future growth. None of it was secret. None of it was illegal. It was simply careful planning performed by professionals who understood how quickly circumstances can change. At the time, Olivia barely paid attention. She signed routine documents when necessary and dismissed most conversations as boring legal details. Her exact words still echoed in my memory. "You worry too much about paperwork." Maybe she was right. Maybe I did. But paperwork has a strange habit of becoming important when everyone else starts counting money that does not belong to them. Michael opened the folder and began reviewing documents one by one. Ownership charts, trust agreements, corporate records, signed filings. Years of preparation sitting neatly organized across a conference table. "Do you know what the Bennett family believes right now?" he asked. I smiled slightly. "That they won." "Exactly." Michael leaned back in his chair. "They believe they understand your financial situation. They believe they know where everything is. They believe those divorce papers were the final move on the board." He tapped a document with his finger. "They are wrong." The room fell quiet. Outside the window, traffic moved steadily through downtown streets. Ordinary people heading to ordinary jobs. Meanwhile, 7 years of planning sat between us. Looking back, I realized something almost ironic. The Bennett family had spent years measuring my value using visible things. Houses, vehicles, business headlines, public success. They never asked deeper questions because they assumed they already knew the answers. Confidence can be dangerous when it replaces curiosity. Michael closed the folder and looked directly at me. "Nathan, there is something else you need to know." The expression on his face changed slightly. Not concern, not worry, something closer to disbelief. "Last night, after you left that Christmas gathering, someone contacted me." My stomach tightened. "Who?" Michael exhaled slowly. "Let us just say that not everyone in that family is as confident as they pretend to be." Michael's words stayed with me long after I left his office. Not everyone in that family is as confident as they pretend to be. The sentence echoed in my head as I drove through downtown Tulsa. Winter sunlight reflected off glass buildings and patches of melting snow. The city looked ordinary, calm. Yet somewhere behind the scenes, things were already moving. The strange part was that I felt no desire for revenge. People assume that when a marriage ends, anger becomes the dominant emotion. Sometimes it does. For me, it was disappointment. Disappointment has a quieter voice. It does not shout. It simply changes the way you see people. Later that afternoon, Michael called again. His voice sounded measured, professional. "I received another message," he said. "From the same person." I pulled into a parking lot overlooking the river and turned off the engine. "What did they say?" There was a brief pause. "The Bennett family is planning a celebration this weekend." I laughed softly. "A celebration?" "Apparently they believe everything is settled." I looked out at the gray water moving beneath the bridge. They always did enjoy counting money before it arrived. Michael did not laugh. Nathan, there is more. His tone shifted. They are already discussing what they expect Olivia to receive. That did not surprise me. What surprised me was how little I felt. Maybe because I had spent years watching the gradual transformation happen. Richard had always admired success, but somewhere along the way admiration turned into expectation. Kyle followed the same path. Susan stopped asking whether people were happy and started asking whether they were winning. Even Olivia changed. Looking back, I realized something uncomfortable. They had stopped viewing wealth as a tool and started viewing it as an identity. The distinction matters. One can be lost. The other becomes a trap. That evening I returned home and opened a bottle of sparkling water. The house remained quiet. Outside, Christmas decorations still lined the neighboring homes. Inflatable snowmen, reindeer displays, strings of lights wrapped around trees. The holiday season continued as though nothing had changed. I sat in my study and reviewed old photographs stored inside a wooden cabinet. Vacations, anniversaries, family gatherings, years compressed into printed moments. One photograph caught my attention. It showed Richard standing beside me at a barbecue almost a decade earlier. His arm rested on my shoulder. He was smiling proudly. Back then, he often introduced me as the hardest working man he knew. I stared at the image for a long time. People rarely change all at once. They drift. One compromise, one rationalization, one decision at a time. The person in that photograph genuinely appreciated me. I believed that. The problem was that appreciation slowly became dependence, and dependence eventually became entitlement. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Michael. This one included a single attachment. I opened it. It was a photograph. The image showed a dining room decorated with holiday centerpieces and expensive wine bottles. Several members of the Bennett family sat around a table smiling. Richard stood near the head of the room, raising a glass. The timestamp showed it had been taken less than an hour earlier. They had already started celebrating. I studied the image carefully. What struck me was not the smiles. It was the certainty behind them. They looked like people standing at the finish line. People convinced the race was over. Then I noticed something else. Olivia was not smiling as broadly as the others. Most people would have missed it. I almost did. But after 20 years of marriage, I knew her expressions better than anyone. There was tension in her eyes. Doubt. The kind of doubt that appears when reality begins whispering something different from the story everyone else is telling. My phone rang before I could think further. Michael again. I just finished reviewing everything, he said. Every document. Every filing. Every trust agreement. I waited. And his voice became very quiet. 7 years ago, you signed one document that changed everything. I leaned back in my chair. Outside the window, snow began falling once more. Small flakes drifting through the darkness beneath the streetlights. How long before they figure it out? I asked. Michael exhaled slowly. If they are lucky, a few days. Another pause followed. If they are not lucky, they are about to learn the truth in the most public way possible. 3 days after Christmas, the first crack appeared. It arrived not with a dramatic confrontation or an angry phone call, but with an email. Most life-changing moments do not announce themselves. They simply appear in an inbox and wait. That morning I was sitting in my study watching snow drift across the backyard when my phone vibrated. Michael's name appeared on the screen. I answered immediately. It started, he said. His voice carried the calm confidence of someone who had spent years preparing for a moment exactly like this. What happened? I asked. Olivia's attorney received preliminary documentation this morning. I leaned back in my chair. Outside, a cardinal landed on the fence before disappearing into the white landscape. Everything looked peaceful. The contrast felt almost absurd. Somewhere across town, panic was beginning. How bad? I asked. Michael laughed softly. Bad enough that they requested an emergency meeting. That afternoon, another photograph arrived from the same anonymous source who had been quietly feeding information to Michael. This image showed the Bennett family gathered once again around Richard's dining room table. The atmosphere looked different now. Gone were the raised glasses and celebratory smiles. Several faces appeared tense. Kyle stared at a laptop screen. Susan looked worried. Richard seemed angry. Olivia sat silently with her arms crossed. I studied the photograph carefully. The room itself had not changed. The same holiday decorations remained. The same centerpiece sat on the table. The same expensive wine bottles lined the sideboard. Yet the mood had transformed completely. Amazing how quickly confidence evaporates when assumptions encounter facts. Later that evening, Michael called again. You remember the trust structure we established 7 years ago? Of course. Their legal team finally reviewed it. I smiled. And they spent most of the afternoon trying to figure out how they missed it. Snow tapped softly against the windows while he spoke. The house felt unusually warm. Comfortable. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt no pressure sitting on my shoulders. Just clarity. Michael continued. Nathan, they built their entire strategy around assets they assumed they understood. But they never actually understood them. Exactly. Another silence followed. Then Michael added something interesting. According to the source, Richard is furious. That did not surprise me. Richard always believed confidence could substitute for preparation. He was the type of man who skimmed headlines and assumed he knew the entire story. The problem with that approach is that reality rarely rewards assumptions. The next morning, things became even more interesting. Olivia called me for the first time since Christmas. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. Her voice sounded controlled, but something underneath had changed. Nathan. Olivia. A brief silence followed. The kind that exists between two people who suddenly realize they are having completely different conversations. I think we need to discuss some things, she said. About what? Another pause. The financial disclosures. There it was. Not us. Not our marriage. Not 20 years together. Financial disclosures. The phrase told me everything I needed to know. I walked toward the kitchen and poured a glass of water. You have attorneys, I said calmly. They can handle it. Nathan, this is serious. I looked out the window at the frozen lawn. I know. Her breathing grew slightly heavier. Things are not matching what we expected. Expected. Another interesting word. I suppose that depends on expectations, I replied. She did not answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her confidence sounded thinner. Did you know this would happen? I considered the question carefully. I knew exactly what I signed 7 years ago. Silence. Long silence. Then the call ended. No argument. No accusations. Just silence. That evening, Michael called one final time. The source attended another family meeting. And I asked. Nobody is celebrating anymore. I stood by the window watching darkness settle across the neighborhood. Christmas lights still glowed from nearby houses, casting reflections across the snow. Families continued gathering. Children continued laughing. Life continued moving forward. Meanwhile, somewhere across town, a group of people who thought the game was over had just realized they never understood the rules. And according to Michael, the most important document had not even been revealed yet. The document appeared on a Thursday morning. No dramatic courtroom scene. No television cameras. No raised voices. Just a file delivered through official channels and reviewed by people who suddenly realized the landscape beneath their feet was different than they thought. I was in my office when Michael called. Sunlight poured through the windows, reflecting off the frozen parking lot outside. The holiday season was winding down. Christmas decorations still hung in some places, but people had already started returning to normal life. At least most people had. They received it, Michael said. I knew immediately what he meant. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Some truths arrive loudly. Others arrive with the quiet certainty of gravity. How did they react? I asked. Michael laughed once. Not mockingly. More like someone witnessing the predictable outcome of years of assumptions. According to our source, nobody spoke for almost a full minute. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. 7 years earlier, the document had seemed almost boring. Another legal review. Another planning session. Another stack of paperwork designed to protect long-term interests. The kind of thing responsible people handle and then forget about. Yet that single document connected everything together. Ownership, control, authority, structure. The entire framework had been sitting in plain sight for years. Nobody hid it. Nobody disguised it. The Bennett family simply never bothered to understand it. Michael continued. Richard apparently demanded multiple reviews. Then he hired an outside consultant. Then another one. And both came to the same conclusion. I smiled slightly. Facts have a stubborn quality. They do not care who dislikes them. By late afternoon, another photograph arrived from the anonymous source. This one looked different from the others. The dining room table was covered with folders, laptops, notebooks, and legal paperwork. Richard stood near the window with both hands resting on the back of a chair. Susan appeared exhausted. Kyle looked pale. Olivia sat alone at one end of the table, staring down at a stack of documents. The celebration was officially over. What struck me most was not their disappointment. It was their confusion. They genuinely believed something unfair had happened. That realization fascinated me. People often mistake expectation for entitlement. The two are not the same thing. You can expect something and still recognize it as not yours. Entitlement begins when expectation transforms into ownership inside your mind. That transformation had happened years earlier. They simply did not notice. Later that evening, Olivia called again. Her voice sounded different now, less certain, less rehearsed. "Nathan," she said quietly, "can we meet?" I looked out the window. Snowflakes drifted through the glow of a streetlight outside my office. "Why?" I asked. Another pause. "Because I think there are things we should discuss face to face." The answer was careful. Too careful. "We had years to discuss things face to face," I replied. Silence followed. Long silence. Then she asked the question she had probably wanted to ask from the beginning. "Did you plan this?" I considered the words. Plan what? All of it. The question hung between us. I thought about the countless meetings with accountants, attorneys, advisors, and consultants. The years of routine business planning. The endless paperwork. The ordinary decisions that responsible people make every day. "No," I said honestly. "I planned for uncertainty. There is a difference." She did not respond immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. "My attorney says everything changes because of that document." I closed my eyes for a moment. "No, Olivia. Everything changes because people made assumptions." After the call ended, I sat quietly in the dark office for several minutes. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass. Cars moved through intersections below. Life continued. The strange thing was that I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just perspective. Because the document itself was never the real story. The real story was what it revealed. It revealed who prepared and who assumed, who listened and who ignored, who built and who counted. And according to Michael, the next 48 hours were going to reveal something even more important. The anonymous source who had been quietly sharing information was finally ready to tell us why they had chosen to help in the first place. 2 days later, we finally learned the identity of the person who had been quietly sending information. The answer surprised me less than it should have. It was Susan. Michael delivered the news during a phone call on a cold Sunday morning. I stood on my back porch holding a cup of coffee while frost covered the wooden railing. For a moment, I said nothing. Susan had spent years standing beside Richard, years supporting family decisions, years watching events unfold from the background. Yet apparently she had reached a point where silence became heavier than honesty. "Why?" I asked. Michael exhaled slowly. "Because according to her, things went further than she expected." I stared across the yard as a thin layer of snow sparkled beneath the pale winter sun. "What does that mean?" "It means she thought there would be a divorce. She did not realize there would be a celebration." That answer stayed with me. Looking back, it made sense. People can justify many things to themselves. They can explain away selfish decisions. They can rationalize questionable behavior. But sometimes a single moment forces them to confront what they have become. For Susan, that moment had apparently been Christmas Day. Michael later shared portions of a conversation he had with her. She described the atmosphere inside the house after I left. The celebration continued for a while. Richard made several speeches. Kyle joked about future vacations. Relatives discussed possibilities as though money had already arrived. At first, Olivia participated. Then gradually she withdrew. According to Susan, the mood shifted even before the legal documents arrived. Doubt started appearing. Questions started forming. But Richard refused to listen. He remained convinced everything would work out exactly as planned. Confidence can be comforting. It can also be dangerous. Over the following weeks, the situation deteriorated. The anonymous photographs stopped because there was no longer anything worth hiding. Family meetings became arguments. Assumptions became disappointments. Expectations became frustrations. One evening, Susan told Michael something that struck me deeply. "Nobody talks about Nathan anymore," she said. "They only talk about what they thought they were going to get." That single sentence explained everything. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being a husband and become a calculation. A line item. A future outcome. The realization should have hurt. Instead, It felt strangely freeing. Because once someone reduces you to a number, their disappointment is no longer about you. It is about the fantasy they created. By late January, Olivia called again. This time her voice sounded exhausted. Not angry, not defensive, just tired. "I owe you an apology," she said. The words arrived quietly. I stood in my kitchen staring through the window as snow melted from the roof outside. For several seconds I did not answer. Not because I wanted to punish her. Because I genuinely did not know what to say. "For what?" I finally asked. Another long pause followed. "For a lot of things." The answer felt honest. More honest than anything she had said in months. Yet honesty arriving late does not change the past. It only changes the future. We spoke for nearly 20 minutes. Not about money. Not about legal documents. Not about ownership structures. For the first time in a very long time, we spoke about reality. She admitted that somewhere along the way she had started measuring success differently. She admitted that outside voices influenced her more than she realized. She admitted that she stopped appreciating things she once valued. None of those admissions changed the outcome, but they explained it. When the call ended, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because she apologized. Because the pretending was finally over. A few days later, Michael called with one final update. Richard had stopped fighting. The consultants had reached their conclusions. The attorneys had completed their reviews. Reality was now fully understood by everyone involved. "So that is it?" I asked. Michael laughed softly. "For them, maybe." I looked outside as the last Christmas decorations in the neighborhood were finally being taken down. Winter remained, but the season was changing. "And for me?" I asked. Michael paused for a moment. "For you, Nathan, I think the next chapter is finally beginning." 1 year later, Christmas arrived again. The strange thing about healing is that it rarely feels dramatic while it is happening. There is no music playing in the background. No flashing sign telling you that you have finally moved on. Most of the time, healing looks like ordinary mornings, quiet evenings, and the gradual realization that a pain which once consumed your thoughts no longer controls your life. The snow had returned to Tulsa just as it had the year before. White covered the rooftops. Lights glowed from neighboring homes. Families gathered around dinner tables. Life continued moving forward, exactly as it always does. I stood on the back porch of my house holding a mug of coffee and watching snowflakes drift through the air beneath the glow of the patio lights. The house behind me felt peaceful. Not because it was larger. Not because it was more expensive. Peace has very little to do with possessions. Peace comes from knowing exactly who you are when nobody else is defining you. During that year, my life changed in ways I never expected. Some business opportunities expanded. New projects appeared. Old friendships grew stronger. I traveled more. I slept better. I laughed more often. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had stopped carrying the weight of trying to be enough for people who had already decided I was not. The biggest surprise was that I no longer felt angry. For a long time I thought anger would be the final chapter. It was not. Understanding became the final chapter. Understanding that people reveal themselves through their choices. Understanding that respect cannot survive where gratitude disappears. Understanding that some endings are actually acts of protection disguised as loss. A few weeks before Christmas, Olivia called one last time. Her voice sounded calm. Older somehow. Life has a way of humbling all of us eventually. We spoke for several minutes. There was no argument. No blame. No discussion about money. Just two people acknowledging the truth. She told me she wished many things had happened differently. I believed her. I also understood that wishing and changing are not the same thing. Before ending the call, she said something that stayed with me. I spent years chasing what I thought would make me happy. I looked out the window as she spoke. And I asked gently. A long silence followed. I should have paid more attention to what already did. After we hung up, I sat quietly for a long time. Not sad. Not happy. Just reflective. Because life is rarely about villains and heroes. Most of the time it is about choices. Small choices repeated over years until they become a destination. Richard and the rest of the family eventually moved on as well. People always do. The world keeps turning. Seasons keep changing. New stories replace old ones. Yet every Christmas, I still think about that room. The tree. The applause. The certainty on their faces. And I think about something else too. How close I came to believing their opinion of me was the truth. That may have been the greatest lesson of all. Never allow people who benefit from underestimating you to define your value. Your worth does not decrease because someone else fails to see it. As the snow continued falling outside, I took a final sip of coffee and smiled. Not because I had won. Life is not a competition. I smiled because I was free. Free from resentment. Free from expectations. Free to build a future based on truth instead of approval. And if there is one thing this experience taught me, it is that sometimes the most powerful response is not revenge. It is growth. It is walking forward when others expect you to stay broken. It is choosing peace when bitterness would be easier. So what do you think about Nathan's story? What would you have done if you were sitting in that room that Christmas day? Let us know your thoughts. And if stories about resilience, self-respect, and unexpected life lessons speak to you, consider subscribing and joining us for the next journey. Sometimes the end of one story becomes the beginning of a far better one.